Howdy partners, I'm Trini Beatty, and tonight on Georgia Detours, we're going to be checking out some of Georgia's most sacred Native American spots and checking out the art of Frederick Remington. In the meantime, I haven't quite figured out this horseback riding thing yet, so we're going to join the Okmulgee Nation on their annual celebration.
Some of the dances that you were seeing out here today are, they're all universally done in your powwows today. Each one of the styles of dancing, they have their own origin on where they come from and what tribe originated them. But the styles that you do see powwows today are all universally done by all tribes from all over. Everything has a significant meaning, from our beadwork, to our designs. Each one of our designs could mean something to that person. Whether or not if it was pertaining to their tribe, where they were from, what band they were in their tribe, a family name, a family crest. Each one of these designs that you wear have a significant meaning.
This site is very sacred to American Indian people, especially the Muskogee Creeks. This was their historic homeland. They are descendants of those who built the mounds here, which the park is most famous for. And so we view this as both a homecoming for the American Indian people, and then also an opportunity for visitors to come out here and learn the true story. There's a lot of stereotypes out there and so forth, and the visitors can come here, talk with, interact with, watch, and learn from the true American Indian people.
Being able to put small structures up like I have in my camp gives that visual idea of how the people had evolved, going through thousands of years, even right here where we're standing, but also all across the United States and Canada.
A lot of these songs that we sing today are composed up of many different tribes. The drum itself came from a certain place around the Dakota territories, from the Sioux people, or the Lakota, Nakota, Dakota. They're the ones that created this style of drum that we all use at powwows today, and it was given to everybody to share. But each one of these tribes have adopted that drum, and what they do is they make their own songs, they compose their own songs in their own language, and they share it with all the other Native American tribes that are out there, and then we all collectively can sing them together.
What we try to do here is give people a full, wide view of both current Native culture with the traditional, with the fancy dancing, and then the very talented artists and craftspeople. Then we have people here doing historic lifestyle demonstrations, showing how the people dressed, lived, tools, and so forth back in the historic and prehistoric times.
Paleo-Indian was 14,500 BC to about 7,500 BC. Archaic is going to be 7,500 BC to about 500 BC. Woodland is going to be 1,000 BC, 1,000 AD. Mississippian is going to be 1,500 AD to about 800 AD. Now, once again, all of these tools are original from that time period. Now, I know when people start getting dates and they see the weapons, they think that I'm extremely intelligent. Well, I'm pretty smart when it comes to weapons, but my dad told me if you don't know what you're talking about, keep your mouth shut. So to make sure I get the dates right, I just write them on the back, you see? So you make sure you get your dates right, and then the artifacts follow through with that, right?
Muskogee Creeks do what's called the traditional stomp dance. That's what's going on now in the background. That dance is one that has probably been taking place on these grounds for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Not real showy like the fancy dancing that will go on later. And even some of those are also traditional, but this stomp dance is once again, probably the most traditional dance that you'll see here.
It's very special to be a part of something that is so cultural based, especially in different communities all over the United States. You know, my tribe, the Cree people, you know, we're from up north. You know, originally I'm from Canada. You know, so to be up there and to share it up there is special. But to be able to go everywhere, all over the United States, and share, you know, our cultural experiences, you know, a little bit of knowledge on what we're doing today. You know, not just, you know, past history, you know, but what Native Americans are doing now.
One animal is like a super Walmart to us. That's right, because you got glue, you've got clothing, you've got needles, you've got the tools for the next hunt, arrow points, spear points, scrapers, water bottles. Everything comes from that one animal. And it was our respect for all things on this earth that made it possible for us to survive without any modern day conveniences. The proof of that is in all the different things that I've made here.
You know, there are different significant things that a lot of people don't understand about our culture and about a lot of cultures. And if they just you know, go to some more events like this, you know, they'll get a better understanding on whether or not, you know, they can depict on what's true and what's not, and what Native Americans are doing in their country today. And I think that's very, very special.
At one time, we didn't have a voice. We were not allowed to tell our story because amongst our Native people, we have two types of history. We have what's called American history. What that means to us is his story, not our story. We have verbal history and oral traditions. And as long as we keep verbal and oral traditions going, our culture will survive. If you write it down, they could take it away from you and they could burn it. They can't take verbal history away unless they take us away. They tried that. We're still here. We've taken anything that's been put in front of us, went around it, over to through it, but we're still here even to this day. Now our different reservations are teaching their own language because they didn't take that away from us. They're teaching their own traditions. They're doing their own ceremonies again. So for our people, this is a new beginning for us.
Oh, Sassy, you're such a good horse. Didn't you love those Native American dances? Me too. Love the drums, the singing, so beautiful. So it turns out that the Okmulgee National Park isn't the only one here in Georgia that is a historical and sacred spot to Native Americans. In fact, a little bit further up north in Cartersville, there are the Etowah Mounds. And here on Georgia Detour, we're going to take you back to that sacred spot.
The Etowah Indian Mounds are mounds that were built by Native Americans that lived in this area of Georgia, starting around 1000 ADs, and they quit building around the mid-1300s. We have several different types of mounds here. They basically can be broken down into ceremonial mounds, burial mounds, and habitation mounds. So a habitation mound would be layers of dirt built up similar to a foundation for a religious or political leader to put their house on top of and live. The height of the mound suggests the hierarchy or the status of that person. So the more influential they are, the larger the mound. Same way with the ceremonial mounds. Sometimes these are built up over time for political buildings or ceremonial buildings like a council house. Usually you can think of them as public buildings. In today's standards, it might be your police station, your city hall, those types of buildings that the Native Americans would have had. Burial mounds usually were just for the elite, the chief's family, and those would have been built up. They would have had basically similar to a religious building on top of a structure that would have housed statuaries and religious objects, and then inside the mound you would see burials being made. So the chief and the chief's family would be buried in log line or stone lined tombs, along with different grave goods, pottery and Celt stones, jewelry, depending on what they thought was valuable.
Etowah was populated longer than the United States have been here, longer than the state of Georgia, including the colonial times. It was populated from about 1000 AD until around 1550, somewhere in that area. That's a long time. And I think it's hard for people maybe to grasp, because they see the United States, they think that's history. And of course, for a lot of Georgia, history started in 1861. And it's hard to figure out, really, even that it's Etowah was a small period of time, because you go back thousands and thousands on top of thousands of years that people have been here.
This was their capital city for a while, or what we would think of as a capital city, one of their main cities. It is the second largest mound in the United States for the Mississippian time period. So you see the Cahokia Mounds up in Illinois, they're 100 feet, 120 feet there or so. Ours are 63 feet. But that does mean that the chief at this site would have been pretty much the, say, second most important Native American as far as political power in the United States, or what would be the United States now at that time period. During the time period that the Mounds were here, we really don't know the names of the tribes. They didn't have a written language, so we have to look at oral history from the Native Americans that exist today and early explorers that came through the area.
Ours was not a written language or a written history, so it's oral and people need to understand. We encourage our elders to really help us write our history so that everyone can understand it and they can go on and learn and make sure that people get the accurate account of our people.
The Muskogee people used to be a very powerful nation. It could probably stand toe-to-toe with any other in the East. Of course, I think earlier on, tribal warfare wasn't as violent, I don't believe, as it was later on. Most of those fights was probably to maybe to settle a matter, and it wasn't to annihilate a whole people. And that's how warfare changed later on.
The time Hernando de Soto came through this area in the 1540s, this site probably was under the control of the Coosa chiefdom. There were several other close by chiefdoms, but that seems to be the one that this site was associated with at that time. By the time you get to the 1700s, the Coosa have joined with other Muskogean-speaking Native Americans and other languages too. By the time you get to the mid-1700s, you see the Cherokees are also occupying the area, and oral tradition states that the Cherokee and the Creek at that time decided to play a stickball game to determine where their land borders were. According to oral history, this would have been played near the town of Ball Ground up the river 20 or 30 miles. The Cherokee supposedly won the game, and the Chattahoochee River became the southern border for the Cherokee. This was later written down in documentation when Benjamin Hawkins was sitting down by the federal government to write a treaty between the Creek Cherokee and the federal government. And so it was mentioned in that, and that substantiates the oral tradition. As Europeans move in, and eventually those Native Americans were removed. The Creek were removed slightly before the Cherokee, and then the Cherokee, of course, were the famous removal of the Trail of Tears, as we call it. Most of them were pushed out of the area.
They went out and they rounded our people up. As they went out and took them, if someone was to take your home, would you fight back? Yes. Everybody would fight for what belongs to them and what they hold sacred. We were fighting for our lives. We were fighting for our homes. We were fighting for the land that holds the bones of our ancestors. So I would assume that they thought that that was savage because we fought back. If you look at wars, it was the Cowboys always won the victory and the savages were savage.
Colonel Tumlin came here in the 1830s. He was part of the Georgia militia, the Georgia Guard that came through here. Tumlins have lived here ever since, and I'm the, fifth generation. My son's the sixth generation that's living here now. He got his title colonel evidently in the Seminole Wars when he went down. Back in those days, the men would elect their officers. He was the first sheriff for the Cherokee Territory, which is now 10 counties. He came through here looking for a ready-made farm at the time. Piecing things together was probably part of the Moravian mission that was located on the other side of the river on this side. That mission, they were farmers. Back in the day, the Native Americans were farming the land and everything, and when they were removed back during that day for the reasons, whatever justification at that time, the land was taken over. Jackson was wanting to remove all the Native Americans to the west side of the Mississippi. Trail of Tears came about in the 1830s from the removal of the Indians in this area.
Originally, when the state got the property, the state bought 53 plus or minus acres. This used to be part of a large farm, and before that it was part of a plantation. The Tumlin family got this during the Cherokee Land Lottery, so they had acquired up to about 3 miles of riverfront, quite a few acres. So, like I say, the state bought 53 plus or minus, and then the Tumlins donated a few years later another 10 plus or minus acres, and that equals out to about 68 acres. To most Native Americans, this is a sacred site. It's a closed sacred site, meaning that no more ceremonies are supposed to take place on it. They would have ceremonies to open it as an open ceremonial location if there was a need for a ceremony. It's almost like a national cemetery, or a place that would be similar to Georgians that want to visit Savannah, because it at one time was the seat of power, but at the same time more of a ceremonial and religious aspect to it. It's sacred ground, and there's not an easy way to say that other than, think of places that we may think of sacred places, our churches, synagogues, religious structures and cemeteries that we would visit. It's the same thing with Native Americans. It's just a sacred location to them.
They're very precious to us, and it took a lot for them to do that and to maintain them, because once they were built, they were not just permanent. They continued to maintain them and make sure that they existed for a long time. Because if you look at Etowah, it's 63 feet high, and it's 3 miles around it. So it is a massive thing. So they built that to last and for people to remember who we are.
You do feel a big emotion when you're on those fields, and you think back of what happened there and what took place.
Most people don't really realize how the town worked. You had the defensive ditch and a palisade wall that would have barricaded the inside portion, which is about the 54 acres. And then outside of that, we would have seen quite a bit of other village.
You would have it set up in a square. There would be a fire in the middle of the town, or the square. And they would continue to do different things. You have a cabin for the older people, and they are your teachers. You learn from your people, your ancestors. Then you have a square and a cabin that would have where we set it up to honor God. We carry our main boxes into there that have our ceremonial things. We hang our prayer ribbons, which as they sway, they take our prayers up to God. Then we have the women's cabin, or what you would call the cabin where you learn. We teach our children. The children go in that cabin with their mothers or their grandmothers, and they learn there all the things. They would not go with their fathers. The children remained with the mothers. The mothers had custody of everything. They owned the stuff. So then you would have a warrior's cabin or a worker's cabin, which I would liken it to the city. The city has city workers who go out and they do things. So the people who were in that particular house would be the people who went out and maintained the city or your tribal grounds, or they would maintain those mounds. Our people always believed in one God. We knew that there was a creator. We may not have called him God. We called him Ofunga, the old one, who has been and always has been. So we know how God had created us. We did not worship things. We always, if we took something, we always gave something back as an offering to Hasaga-Tamisi, as we call him now.
The Mississippian culture had a trade network that had already existed for 400, 500, 600 years through the Hopewell culture, maybe even older. They were trading copper from the Great Lakes region, salt from towards Texas. We even have samples of natural asphalt tar that comes from the La Brea tar pits area that was traded, hand over foot to out here. A lot of trade with the Gulf Coast, so we have shark's teeth and other things that Native Americans were using as jewelry. And then, of course, in our area, the commodity of iron ochre and mineral pigments, graphite, mica up the river, things that they were trying to control that trade of. It's what made them wealthy in this area. And then, of course, a few Spanish European artifacts that were found in the area that do show that the Spanish were here during that time period when Hernando de Soto and other people were coming through.
The Muskogee people believe that you never leave the land that your family is buried on. The bones of your ancestors are very important to us, so that's where we tend to stay in the area that they are at.
It's what you are, it's your being, it's your whole identity, and that's why it's so important to us.
from on top of the mounds really makes me wonder what it would have looked like back then. Being around all these horses takes me back in time. I wonder what it would have been like living in the Wild West. I mean, not just the Native American life, but the Cowboys. Not too far from the mounds is an extensive Western art collection called the Booth Museum of Western Art. Georgia Detours got an exclusive look at Frederick Remington's artwork.
We're in the Special Exhibition Gallery at the Booth Western Art Museum, and our current focus is on Frederick Remington, probably the biggest name in Western art. And he's very well known for his incredible sculpture, particularly the Bronco Buster, which is one of the most ubiquitous pieces of Western art in the country, one of the most recognized, most beloved. But he is not known very much by the public as a painter. And in his day, he was more well known as a painter. And so we really wanted to focus on that aspect of his career and show all the media that he worked in throughout his career. And of course, enough sculpture to have a good time. Remington grew up in upstate New York in a fairly wilderness area. His father had been a colonel in the Civil War, and he grew up hearing war stories from his father. And his father wanted him to go to West Point, but he thought that sounded like too much work. He wasn't much for physical labor and told his uncle he wanted to find something that wasn't too strenuous. And so he thought maybe becoming a journalist would be a good way to go. But his father died at 50 years old, left him a little bit of money, and he decided to go for an adventure out west. And he went and invested in a sheep ranch. He invested in a saloon. Both of those didn't do very well. His girlfriend told him her father would not approve of him being in the saloon business. So he came back, married her, and talked his way into some illustration jobs. He told folks he had studied art at Yale, which he had only for a year, and he'd been out west a lot, knew about the West, and he could become the illustrator of Western stories, which there were a lot in the news magazines of the day, and really kind of bluffed his way in the beginning. He wasn't that great an artist, but he quickly got better, and he did work hard at that. He wasn't so much for physical labor, but he did work hard at his art, took some classes at the Art Students League in New York, and quickly became the best-known illustrator, particularly of Western stories, but was as famous in his day as Norman Rockwell would be to us. The sculptural aspect of it, of course, that's what they're most tuned to be looking for. And we have an excellent example of 3 Bronco Buster sculptures, one of which was a lifetime cast done by the Lost Wax method, highly detailed. There's one by the sand cast method, also done in his lifetime, which is beautiful and has a little more rounded edges, but still a lot of detail. And then there's the kind that you would buy at a decorator or an antique store, you know, a reproduction of a reproduction, basically. And people really enjoy seeing the differences and understanding that, you know, if you have one of the reproductions, it's like having a print of a painting. It's fine to have in your house, it's nice to live with, you can enjoy it, squeeze all the enjoyment out you want of it, but just don't think you're leaving anything to your grandkids. It's really only worth the metal it's made of. So that's one of the aspects. The other is discovering what a great painter he was and realizing that we don't know that much about him as a painter because his sculpture so overshadows it. He actually wrote to a friend of his when he was getting started in sculpture and said, "My watercolors and my oils may dry up and disintegrate, but I will ring down through history and sculpture." And he didn't know how right he was, to the point that people don't even know he was a painter. What you're looking at is a recreation of Remington's studio in New Rochelle, New York. The actual studio pieces that came out of it when he passed are at the Buffalo Bill Historical Center in Cody, Wyoming. But they were nice enough to loan us a lot of the sketches that you see in the studio recreation. They also loaned us 4 or 5 of the original objects that were in his studio the day he died. But this is what it would have looked like if you had gone to visit Remington in the day. He was big on bringing back these artifacts from the West and really setting up things that he could work from in his paintings that were handy on the wall, sketches where he thought he had really done well with a particular horse or a lighting condition or a landscape. And it also was eye candy. If you came as a collector or somebody interested in buying a painting, you would say, wow, he must really be of the West. Look at all the things he's collected, all the things he's brought back from out West, and that he's authentic and really must be a true Western person. The painting that's on the easel in the recreation of the studio is the last thing that was on his easel when he died. The staff at the Remington Museum up in Ogdensburg, New York calls it the cigarette. We don't know what he would have called it, but that's the title that comes down to us today. And it's a good example of a nocturne, a painting done to simulate night or twilight conditions. And that was one of the things that Remington did to really try to get better known as a true artist, a painter, a fine artist, not just an illustrator. and that was to do a lot of nocturnal paintings, and he became very good at them, was very highly recognized both in his day and in more recent years. There was an exhibition of his nocturnal paintings at the National Gallery, and it was highly regarded as an excellent exhibition. Well, the Booth Museum is primarily focused on collecting living artists and artists of the contemporary period. That's kind of our niche within all the great Western museums in the country. And that's what we primarily focus on in our permanent exhibition galleries. But in our temporary exhibition galleries, we really try to give people a sense of the rest of Western art, particularly the historical, which then gives you the context for looking at the work of the living artists. Who are the shoulders that those artists are standing on generations of? The love of the West and the love of great art can come together anywhere, and we're not alone. The Booth Museum is one of 4 Western museums east of the Mississippi. There's one up in Corning, New York, one in Indianapolis, Indiana, and a new one that just opened in St. Petersburg, Florida. So it's not that we're truly unique. We're kind of unique in this part of the country. But a lot of the great Westerners were from the South. If you think back to the times at the end of the Civil War during Reconstruction, it was quite a common thing to come home and find a sign tacked in the yard that said GTT, gone to Texas, and other places in the West. And as there was devastation here, people gravitated towards the West. And so some of your most famous Westerners, Doc Holliday, John Fremont, people like that were from Georgia originally. We also had Henry Flipper. He was the first black graduate of West Point from Thomasville, Georgia, and was a second lieutenant in the United States Army Buffalo Soldiers, and was one of the guys out there chasing Geronimo and Victorio around the Southwest. So there are a lot of Georgia stories, Georgia ties, but the ultimate reason why it's here is there was somebody who loved the West, loved this community, had a successful telecommunications company they sold, and anonymously built this museum, put their collection in it, gave it to the community, and then it's been a gift to be nurtured by the citizens of Northwest Georgia.
Well, I can't believe he's not from the Wild West. Looking at his art, I never would have known. And well, this city girl has learned enough for one day. Looking at all those sacred places and historical sites and artwork was great and all, but my backside is a little sore, and turns out horseback riding might not be my thing. However, I did find a friend that is much more my speed. Right, Gertie? Oh, yeah, we can go. Come on. Howdy. Yeah. Let's go. Woo.
Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. Who cares about the clouds if we're together?